Hello and welcome to South Africa on 99.94 Cricket Every Day. I'm Neil Manthorpe, my co-host. As you all know by now, is Rungani Zama. And we have the challenging task of dissecting the performances from South Africa in particular, and Australia for that matter, in the first two test matches at the Gabba in Brisbane, which South Africa lost by 6 wickets, and then, of course, the innings and 182-run defeat in the second test match, Boxing Day, at the MCG. Normally, Lungani is the calmer of the two of us, but he certainly wasn't able. Mate, you weren't entirely in control of your emotions at one stage, judging by some of your tweets. I think you were quite cross by that performance, weren't you?
I think understandably, Manners. If you wake up at 1 a.m. or whatever it was for the Melbourne test, and that's what you see on the first morning, I think a lot of South Africans would share the sentiment that it's a little bit more than just a bit disappointed. There was obviously talk of the pitch being a big factor in the first test in Brisbane, and you kind of take it with a pinch of salt, and then you go and have a drop-in pitch which had absolutely no gremlins in it, and it was just a series of brain farts, and it's not one isolated. It seems as if they happen in clusters. So you're cruising before lunch and you're 50 for 1 or so, and suddenly you're 60 for 4. When you have a fight back and you 170 for 5, and suddenly you're 180 all out. It's not test standard. And I think the stat that you brought up that said it was statistically the weakest South African team to tour Australia, the stats don't lie. They certainly haven't lied in this case, because it was appalling. And at a time like this, heads really should roll. I think we're past the point of sort of blindly hoping that things will turn around. Heads should roll. Any other team, heads roll on the back of performances, consistent performances like this, where you've forgotten how to score 200. I mean, David Warner scored 200 on his own, and he's supposed to be in a crisis. He was playing in his 100th test. He scored 200 on his own. South Africa haven't managed to do it. Jeepers, God knows when.
Do you know? A couple of months ago now, I was predicting doom and gloom, and you told me to not be so negative and to cheer up, and to be a little bit more positive. And you said that this was the tour of dreams, and playing at the MCG. And it was every bit as good as the previous 5 times I've been lucky enough to be there. 65,000 people, glorious day. It's a magnificent venue, and I compared it to previous tours that I've been on, and there was always the sense, even when they were losing heavily and consistently, there was always a sense that you had that if the South African team played to their potential, and everybody did what they have done previously in test matches, there would be a contest. And you went into every single game with that belief and hope that if they rose and played to their very best, rose to the occasion, then they would give Australia a serious run for the money. And you believed that they could win. And I never had that feeling, unfortunately, before this series. And I said all along, if they can somehow contrive to make it a very low-scoring contest, then maybe the bowlers could produce a miracle. But we're heading to the SCG now, and I cannot see anything different. I mean, and that's terribly sad. And this is all leading up to there's no point berating them. It's like watching your child come last in the 100-meter dash at the school sports day. You don't berate your child and say you should have run faster, because he's just going to say, or she's going to say, I ran as fast as I could, Dad. And that my greatest fear is that that's a reflection on this South African team. I mean, I just don't know whether they could do any better. I think they might honestly be that outclassed.
Well, it's not even nearly the greatest Australian side. So that's the scary bit. I mean, I had to go back to highlights and watch Jeepers from '98 when Cullis was making his first 100. Like you said, even during the times of losing to some great, great Australian teams, there was always the sense that there's one partnership, two partnerships, or a spell of bowling by somebody that gets South Africa back in the game, and there's a contest. And you could feel, I think you can gauge from the crowd and the commentary. If you're sitting back home, you listen to the commentary, and Sean Pollock, Ashwell Prince, and Mark Nicholas more and more were going down Nostalgia Avenue, talking about the better old days when they were competing against the likes of Shane Warne. Because to talk about what's currently happening, that it's a car crash, and it keeps on happening, and it feels as if you're almost picking on or bullying if you keep on going back to the absolutely abject display. And it is scary. I saw a tweet in the midst of several rants. I saw a tweet saying that actually West Indies have outperformed South Africa in their precursor to this South Africa series, which was supposed to be the main event of the summer. West Indies put on a bigger fight than South Africa have. And that, for years we've said you never want to see South African cricket go the way the West Indies cricket have. But if West Indies are producing a better test fight than your South African team, if the alarm bells weren't ringing, then cheapers, you really hope that they are now, because it is an absolute shambles.
We have a huge expanse of topics and ground to cover. But let's start, and we might carry on in part two on this. Let's start with the captain, with Dean Elgar. Obviously, I've been here and I've been watching his press conferences and his pre-match talk, and there's certainly a feeling now over here that he's been talking a big fight, talking a really good fight, and he was almost a little cocky and talking about how the fast bowlers are going to inspire fear and intimidate the Australian batsmen. And it all feels slightly awkward and embarrassing now, particularly with his own form. He scored 32 runs in the first two test matches, twice caught down the leg side. He's been in horrible, horrible form. I think it's the worst form I've ever seen him in. And he also he's veered between honesty, and a very, very difficult job in having to talk after two defeats like that. And he was saying things like, I've got to try and remind these players that they're not crap. But he's been compared to Craig Brathwaite, the West Indies captain, who was unassuming, modest, had no pretensions about his team, and really didn't say very much, and went out and scored 100 himself and tried to lead a very weak team as best he could. And I have just been thinking since we arrived, and in fact before we arrived, about Dean Elgar, that he just winded in, just winded in, and I think he's increased the pressure on himself and his team.
Yeah, man, it's the thing about elite sports is that you earn the right to be arrogant or outspoken with your performances on the field. Otherwise, words are just cheap. And the reality is, none of the performances that South Africa have put up this year have justified any of the cock-a-hoop statements. And when you watch a lot of the post-day press conferences, everyone keeps on saying, oh, the mood in the camp is fantastic, the talk is positive, the body language great, batsmen are having great chats. You shouldn't be having great chats. You haven't scored 200 in a year as a team. You shouldn't be having great positive chats. If you care about playing for your country, if you care about your pride and performance as a sportsman, as a professional, there should be angry conversations. There should be disruption in the camp. That says care. This kumbaya of, oh no, we're having good chats, we're in good space, we're feeling good. it doesn't work. You need someone angry. You need someone really furious at what on earth is going on. We're better than this. Or cheapers, drop all of us, drop me, drop us. We're not doing it, clearly. So something has to change. You can't just, oh no, it'll be better, it'll be better, it'll be better. And maybe that's an issue when you change management and you don't have someone who can be frank because they haven't had the time to build a relationship to be frank. And there's not too many senior players. So everyone is kind of, much they did in the T20 World Cup, just going through the motions and just hoping there'll be a spark of genius that changes something. But, we always compare the fortunes of South Africa and the reaction of South Africa to those big nations that you measure yourself up against. Australia wouldn't. They wouldn't. They'd drop off the team. They would have flown people in already. They've done it before. England wouldn't. So why do South Africa sit meekly and send lovey-dovey Merry Christmas and prosperous New Year, looking forward to a wonderful cricket South African future and all the bit? It's not. It's not a time to be bullshitting, quite frankly. It's a time to be honest and say, look, if that top six is not performing, we're scrapping them and we're going with a brand new top six so that if they fail, at least you can say they've never played at this level, but you know what, in 2 years' time, they would have played enough to understand. If you're not doing your job at that level, this is elite sport. This is not customer service and picking up a phone and having a bad phone call and you can pick up another one. It's not. It's elite sport. You're paid a fortune to represent your team. You're playing in one of the most blue ribbon events in world sport, Boxing Day Test match at MCG. You have to be better. And if you're not, you have to find others and see if they're better. It can't just go through the motions. I said to you before the second test, I doubt there'll be changes. There was one, and even then, you've got to question yourself, is there going to be any changes for the next test? Simon Harmer might come in for one of the fast bowlers. That's it. That's not changing the playbook dramatically. That's not shaking up a dressing room and reminding people of their responsibilities and reminding them that if you do not perform, there are consequences. You feel like people go back to the hotel room and order room service or wander down Main Street in Melbourne and go for dinner and say, okay, we'll see what tomorrow brings. You should be hurt. You should be appalled. You should be furious. You shouldn't be getting along and saying, oh, how wonderful, we're going to Sydney for New Year's and we're going to stand at the harbour and watch the fireworks. You shouldn't be. You should be totally embarrassed at the fact that you could have played 10 days of cricket and cumulatively you've probably played about 4.5. That's embarrassing. It's deeply embarrassing.
Okay, I'll tell you what else is unacceptable in just a moment. We'll take a short break first.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
So let's go back to the captain, Dean Elgar. He is the captain of the ship. He's the one who steers it. And he said after South Africa were humiliated at Old Trafford in the second test match against England that they had a scheduled 9-day break, but because they lost in 3 days, it became an 11-day break. And that was the first time that he said, we're going to take a break from the game. We're not going to become better cricketers by hitting more balls, which caught in my throat. And he said the same after the Gabba, and they lost in 2 days. He said, same thing. We'll take a little bit of time away from the game. We're not going to become better by hitting more balls. Our preparation was good. We did everything right. And he said the same again after the second test match in Melbourne. And that may apply to him. He's played 81 Test matches. He's 36 years old. He's hit hundreds of thousands of cricket balls, and that may well apply to him. And I'm not advocating naughty boy nets. I think they're stupid. Lose a game, make the guys run 20 laps of the ground. I think that's, a coaching methodology sort of that belongs 2 decades ago. But they do need to bat. They do need to hit more balls. They do need... Zams, they've been walking into the nets and batting 40 minutes. Batting 40 minutes in the nets. They need to bat 4 hours. They need to bat 5 hours. They need... I'm at a loss. I don't understand what's going on with Dean Elgar. I don't think he's the right man to be leading the team at the moment.
Well, they have been hitting balls. They've been hitting golf balls in that 11-day break that you spoke about in the UK, and I'm sure there's golf courses that have been toured in Australia with a lot more vigor and aggression than we've seen on the cricket field. And it's not a laughing matter. It's deeply serious. You're not on holiday. You're not on some Australasian tour where your Instagram is going to be boosted up by 100,000 followers. You're playing a game and you're on a tour which is special, has always been special. And the fact that you haven't had this in this long at this time of year, the fact that you have it and you're doing it such an injustice is crazy. And you're right. I mean, it starts at the head. Dean does need to hold himself and his team to far better standards. He's played in far better South African teams and sat in change rooms with far more experienced captains who've, I'm pretty sure, had harsher words when they were needed. There was no sugarcoating and saying, oh, we'll be fine. We don't need to do anything else. We don't need to change anything. We'll just get ready for the next test in our own way. No. Graham Smith wouldn't accept this. Faf du Plessis wouldn't accept this. Hashim Amla wouldn't accept this. AB de Villiers wouldn't accept this. They wouldn't. They just wouldn't.
I know, exactly. So what do you think he is thinking when he says that we are struggling with a lack of experience? Our lack of experience is counting against us. So the least experienced members of the team are Saad Olivier and Marco Jansen. Saad Olivier is 33 years old. He's played a lot of cricket. He's played 9 test matches. Depending on what constitutes experienced, if it's 25 test matches or 30 test matches, then Saad Olivier, if he plays all of them that South Africa have scheduled, will be 37, almost 38 by the time he becomes experienced. Marco Jansen, the equally most least experienced player, has taken 40 wickets this year at 17. His first year in international cricket, he's taken 40 wickets at 17. You've got Kagiso Rabada, who's played 57 tests. You've got Temba Bavuma, who's played 52 test matches. Everybody else has played 20 or so test matches. Tiernas de Bruin, who looked as out of his depth and as inappropriate in that test match as we expected. And and again, it comes back to Dean, who speaks so much about experience, the importance of experience, the value of experience, how much he needs experience and how much inexperience accounts against him. So we were told that Tiernas de Bruin was picked because he's experienced. Yes, he is. He had played 12 test matches and averaged 19. That was the sum of his experience. So we need to move away. We need to, if we're going to lose horribly in 2.5 days, we need to do it with really promising 23 and 24-year-olds, not 33 and 34-year-olds.
Well, Scotty Boland has played less test matches than Sadal Avia. Cameron Green has played pretty
15,
much the same.
I think.
So
yeah.
It doesn't wash. It doesn't wash. You can try and paper over it with inexperience when it suits, but frankly, Scotty Boland and Sadal Avia probably played a similar number of first-class matches, and their opportunities have come later in life. So it's not a case of inexperience. And he wasn't inexperienced when he was making hundreds against New Zealand. He wasn't inexperienced then. He was ready. He was experienced. It was the first class game. It served him well. His experience. He's ready for international cricket. You can't take that back when now you're not coping against Australia, and then you're inexperienced again. You don't lose experience. You actually get more of it. So if you said before that he's experienced and he's ready, you can't now change.
So what do you think Dean is thinking? Or is he thinking when he says we're struggling with a lack of experience? Where does that come from? What makes him say that?
It doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. It's a throwaway comment to try and justify. You got to cling on to something, because obviously honesty would be too harsh to say we're poor. We've not nearly lived up to our numbers and our standards, our expectations. This is poor. All of us, starting with myself. I haven't made runs. Our bowlers haven't held up to stuff. Whatever you want to say, it's the time to be honest. And the conversations that you would hope are being had in the sanctity of the dressing room, be honest and put them on chair so people understand that actually you care, that you are aware that you're falling well short. Because at the moment, when you're saying these PR-heavy answers of, oh no, it's a process, and oh no, we're getting experience, and oh no, the team has changed, we're aware of that. But that's the nature of the beast. Eventually, Glenn McGrath moves on, and Josh Hazlewood comes in, and this guy leaves, and Steve Smith comes in. This guy comes, like, that's the nature. Someone else comes in, and they start inexperienced, and they build it. So you're not going to miraculously have a player who's 50 tests in and ready. You have to build them up, and you have to hold them to standards that tell you that if you play like this, you're only going to play 3 test matches. Stephen Cook only played a handful of test matches because he was deemed not good enough. Someone else came in.
He scored 300.
He scored 300s. But that's what I'm saying. Those are the standards that were there before. So now if people are scoring 10s and 20s and running themselves out and trying to hook a medium pacer before lunch on the first day, and you're calling it inexperience, it's not. It's unaccountability. And there are people who've been dropped for years for poor shots that they've played because they've shown that you don't appreciate this opportunity that you've got. So maybe you need to go a few rungs down the ladder. Markram's not been taken on this tour. He's still making runs in South Africa. He's not been taken. But it seems as if some people are being held to seriously higher standards than others. And that's wrong. That shouldn't happen. It really shouldn't happen. Hold everyone else to the same standards and make sure they understand how much it means to get a test cap. Don't give them a dozen caps and say, oh, we'll see how you go at the end of the summer. We'll see whether we change or not, because you're inexperienced. So we must just give experience for free. If you get one test, so be it. If you're not good enough, you're not good enough. But you must know that.
Just finally in this section, the culture of excuse-making is also troubling me quite a lot. It's a change of management, it's a change of backroom staff, it's a change of the heavy influences. I think Dr. Mohamed Musaji, when he was team manager, would encourage players not to make excuses. You and I, at the age of 14 or 15, know what it's like as a batsman to blame your dismissals and your poor average on the umpires and a bad, an unlucky, a miraculous catch, and just making excuses. And I didn't see Enoch Nkwe, the director of cricket, speaking live because I was in Melbourne, but I read his comments about the poor performance being COVID related, a lack of A tours, and there is a reason. There are legitimate reasons, but it sounded a little bit like excuse making, and that's the problem. It seems to me as well is that there is one batsman in that top 5 who is convinced that the criticism about the test averages and the test performances and the lack of hundreds is unjustified because South Africa have played on more spicy pitches and more difficult pitches than other teams. He's convinced of it. He's convinced that the criticism is unjustified. And he's saying, I'd like to see how the rest of the world's batsmen would do if they'd played on the same pitches that we've had to play on. And that culture of excuse making needs to be ended
nipped in the bud.
quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, excuses start at the top. So, we've got a long-running joke now about this review of T20 World Cup that we're still waiting for. I thought it might be a Christmas present. It still hasn't happened. It's actually just silence now. So there'll now need to be a review of this Australian shambles, of this whitewash that's upcoming. I mean, at some point, Australia had half an attack. Mitchell Starc was bowling with 9 fingers. Cameron Green wasn't bowling. And still, absolutely smashed by an innings. That just tells you that they've slipped so far behind that Australia don't even need to be at their best. They don't even need to be at full strength. This is an Australian team who just 3.5 years ago were so desperate and so out of answers that they resorted to using sandpaper to try and make it a more even contest. In 3 years, are you telling me that South African cricket has tumbled so significantly that half an Australian team can beat them? It's just mind-boggling. It's just every single one of those players, bar maybe Marco Jansen, was already playing first-class cricket at that point, looking at the Test team as the pinnacle, understanding the standards that were there, understanding what is required, and knowing full well that it wasn't 20s and 30s, it was hundreds and 5-wicket hauls just to give you a chance to be looked at. Now, you can brazenly sit in a press conference and say, oh, but we've had it much tougher. We've had the toughest spicy pitches in the world. I'd love to see how... It doesn't matter. That's the schedule. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And someone in the change room should be telling him that. That's absolute bull, what you're saying. It sounds terrible. It sounds like a spoiled brat. And it makes it sound as if you've left this dressing room having said that's what I'm going to speak about and that's what I'm going to say, and we all agree with you. No, it's not. It's not good enough. You can't now blame your toys. Be better. Otherwise, it's a selector's job to get other options, and you can then go back and play on placid pitches and make hundreds, and then say how wonderful you are again. But go back to the back of the queue. If you cannot cope at this level, don't be there. You can't make excuses. They've run out of excuses. And if no one is holding them accountable, then the people who should be holding them accountable should also not be in their jobs either. And the silence from Cricket South Africa at the moment is shameful. Absolutely shameful. Absolutely shameful. There should be genuine concern about where this Test team is, where South African cricket is. It's slipped. It's slipping so far down the national consciousness that you've got to question how many people even bothered to wake up and watch a second Test after what they saw in the first. Done in 2 days. You're thinking Boxing Day is a tradition where you get up and make sure that you stay up late, or you don't even go to bed. You're so excited. You watch, and you rechange your body clock, and you're going to bed at 7, 8 o'clock, and you're going to do again for the next 4 days because you're that excited. You don't want to miss a thing. I can guarantee you there are people who said, I'm glad I have load shedding at midnight because I don't have to stay up and try and justify watching that shambles. And once it gets to that point and people stop caring, you're in real trouble. You're in real trouble. Once people stop calling them out on social media and worrying about the future of the game and saying who's next, then you're in real trouble. If there are URC rugby matches now happening on New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve. People are more excited about that. Stadiums are full. Rugby had this problem too. Newland Stadium was pretty much full. Kings Park Stadium is going to be full tomorrow night for a New Year's Eve rugby match. So summer is now being encroached upon by rugby because the South African rugby system is producing winners and champions and heroes and fun. Of course, you'd rather align yourself and take your family and watch that is competitively priced, that you're going to leave you with a feeling of, oh, those are people who don't look like they're making excuses. Those are people who look like they're about to go and win another World Cup in 2023. There's a culture of transparency and accountability. And yes, their PR is not perfect, but you know what? The one thing that we do know is that there are no excuses. When they fall short, they put their hands up and say, we were short here, we will get better. People buy into that. Win or lose, people buy into honesty, that the thing that I saw is a thing that you saw as a player yourself, and you put your hand up and you apologize to the nation or the team or whatever, and you promise to be better the next time. And if you're not, there's someone else ready to take your place. South African cricket is dwindling because there's absolutely none of that at the moment, and you can see it.
Okay, we've got a lot more on that, and I'm also going to quiz you about potential remedies and solutions going into the future. But that's all for this episode. We'll be back, as I said, in a day or two with more of this bad news, but also hopefully some good news as well. Thank you for listening to South Africa on 99.94. Don't forget you can download the app, and please do rate, review, and subscribe. It certainly helps. But for now, from me, you can follow us on Twitter, by the way, at Neil Manthorpe and at Whamzam17. For now, thanks for watching or listening, whichever you were doing, or both.